Welcome to the Fundamentals of Surveying Q&A review session, question number 7. I'm Dr. Tony Nettleman, and I love to teach. And if I can do anything, I want to help you pass your exam on the first try. The call of the question says, NVDI is a great way to check water content for crops. And NVDI is a type of color spectrum. It's like red, green, and blue, but not really. But for some reason, you only collected RGB, red, green, and blue during your last drone flight. Mistake. What statement best describes NVDI versus RGB on the light spectrum? So on the light spectrum, from X-ray all the way to anything else, how does NVDI compare to RGB? We've got 4 answer choices. NVDI has a slightly longer wavelength than RGB. NVDI has a slightly shorter wavelength than RGB. NVDI has a much shorter wavelength than RGB. And NVDI has a much longer wavelength than RGB. So you have 4 answer choices, and you've got to decide. Why don't you stop right now and go ahead and choose one before we progress on to the other slides.
Want to stay up to date with the latest and greatest surveying exam prep content? Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or subscribe to the NLC channel below to be the first to know when new material is released.
In this diagram, we have a spectrum of light, and the light spectrum runs all the way from gamma rays to radio and TV. So gamma rays have the shortest, and TV and radio have the longest. So we've got gamma rays all the way to radio and TV, and somewhere in between that we have our red, green, and blue. But where does NVDI fall compared to RGB? Well, I can tell you off the top of my head that NVDI is very, very close to RGB because NVDI uses these wavelengths to measure water content, and they do use normal RGB wavelengths. It's just a little bit different. So knowing that off, my common knowledge, I can pretty much eliminate 2 of the 4. So I either know NVDI is slightly lower or slightly higher in wavelengths. But let's read a source and learn exactly what NVDI is. According to Spectra, a commercial photogrammetry company, quote, a NVDI sensor uses wavelengths slightly outside the wavelengths of RGB. So we know they're close. And here's another one. These wavelengths are slightly longer than visible light. There you go. Stop right there. If you want to know more about NVDI, keep reading. If you want to just answer the question correctly, stop right there and answer the question. NVDI has slightly longer wavelength than RGB. Why is that? It's because every type of remote sensing platform has a different wavelength. And whether you're measuring NVDI, RGB, hyperspectral, multispectral, you're not expected to know every single parameter of these platforms. But you should have a working knowledge of the light spectrum as we talk about LiDAR versus RGB versus hyperspectral imagery, and this question definitely tests you on that. If you're not so familiar with light spectrums and remote sensing platforms, take a minute, do a little online research, jump on my online prep course for remote sensing and photogrammetry, and you'll learn a lot about it. And don't feel bad if you couldn't get this question, but this is a question you should know. Would you like more content? I would love if you would join us for a complete Fundamentals of Surveying review course. This guy has slides, videos, practice questions, handouts, everything you need to pass this exam on the first try. It's got the same number of questions and the same question types on its full-length practice exam, and it is built to get you from 0 to SIT licensee as quickly as possible. Join me at nlcprep.com/fs.